Well, it stands for environmental, social and governance, and it's about organisations acting responsibly in each of these regards and being held to account for any shortcomings or transgressions. Organisations need to think about ESG from three different perspectives, and they're all quite different. The first is how they measure up themselves in terms of their own ESG credentials, their own rating. The second is in assessing the the investments that they make in projects, for example. And the third, which is where we come in, is in the screening of third-party relationships, such as suppliers, for ESG risks. And it's that risk by association that's troubling organisations today and driving up demand for technology like ours. The nightmare scenario is that a key supplier does not apply the same standard as you do, and that evidence emerges, for example, of their use of slave labour. Now, the reputational damage that can accrue if you get it wrong can be very significant indeed. But we have a framework that understands what ESG actually is, and in quite some tedious detail. And that's an essential starting point if you want to understand where risk exists. You need to know what bad looks like to be able to watch for it and to respond to it. So I think the E is as well understood about environmental transgressions, but S and the G perhaps are less understood, and that isn't helped by the fact that sometimes the word sustainability is used as shorthand for ESG. Well, of course, what's that got to do with governance? Not a lot. So for us, governance, for example, is about two things. It's about board conduct, diversity, non-executive director representation and all that good stuff. But it's also about trading behaviour, how the business really behaves on the ground. And so there you're talking about things like predatory pricing, bid rigging, running cartels, IP infringement, etc. And for us on the social side, yes, it obviously includes things like treatment of employees, which is fairly obvious, and working conditions, but it's also about community. It's about things such as development-induced displacement and involuntary resettlements, and they are no less important than the bigger items like emissions or slavery, for example. There's a number of them. One is a scale problem. It's not uncommon for organisations to have in excess of 50,000 direct supplier relationships, and those relationships will be very varied. They will be relationships with original equipment manufacturers, supplying big kit or big technology, but it also includes, sole representatives and agents. And the challenge then is, how do you screen them adequately without the use of technology? What you're left with instead are self-declarations, in effect, from those suppliers about how they measure up regarding their own ESG credentials. So how can you be absolutely sure that they are valid? The truth is you can't, and therefore you need to make your own assessment of the risks in dealing with them and uncovering for yourself any evidence of ESG failings. The other challenge is that these organisations that you deal with, because you're probably a large multinational corporation with a very international footprint, is that these organisations that you deal with will be geographically dispersed and operate in markets where English isn't the main language. So if you're trying to screen them, it really does help if you're able to mine for useful ESG risk intelligence using technology that can seek it out in all of those international languages and local languages that are relevant to the supplier. And the final challenge in getting it right is you do need a dynamic perspective on risk. It's not sufficient to have a static point of view taken at a specific point in time. ESG failings can happen at any time during the relationship, so you need to be able to proactively monitor them, and that arguably is where the biggest challenge comes in, and arguably where technology has the most impact. ESG ratings are helpful, and a lot of organisations use them today, but they have their limitations. And so what smartKYC exists to do is to deliver what we call the ground truth, which is what really happens with that business that you're dealing with. But critically, it's technology to automate what would be a massively manual undertaking if you have, thousands upon thousands of third parties that you're dealing with. And so what smartKYC does is it can take all of the suppliers that you have and their main representatives. They can be batch loaded and potential ESG misdemeanors identified, so that those suppliers where there is a potential risk can be triaged for further investigation, for example. And crucially, you can set smartKYC into monitoring mode thereafter. And on a 24/7 basis, you can actually watch for emerging risks so that you can react immediately. And to me, that's the most exciting and useful aspect to it. Someone once said to me, companies exist to sell three things: product, image, or stock. Now, each of these could be adversely impacted if an organization fails to respond to an emerging third-party ESG risk. Sales drop off, the brand is tarnished, and the stock price tanks. So it's not so much, as with banks and KYC, the regulator that you need to worry about. That I think we all know is coming. What you need to concern yourself mostly with is that court of public opinion, and that could have the most damaging impact of all.